When archivist Cella Green turned down billionaire Julian St. James at a museum gala, she never imagined it would spark a slow-burning romance filled with secrets, sacrifice, and a love too true to ignore. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of the Metropolitan Museum's archives. Cella Green tucked a strand of her dark, curly hair behind her ear as she carefully catalogued a collection of recently donated Civil War letters. At 28, she had already established herself as one of the museum's most dedicated archivists, though she remained largely unknown outside its marble walls. "Cella, don't forget about the gala tonight," her co-worker Maddie reminded her, poking her head into the climate-controlled room. "The big donors will be there, and Henderson wants all department heads present." Cella sighed. "I was hoping everyone had forgotten about me." "No chance. Besides, it's just a few hours of smiling and nodding while rich people convince themselves they care about history." "That's exactly what I'm dreading," Cella said, carefully placing the letters back in their acid-free folder. "I've got to check on Aunt Pearl tonight." Maddie gave her a knowing look. "Your godmother has a night nurse on Thursdays. You told me that yourself." Caught in her excuse, Cella shrugged. "Fine, I'll be there, but I'm leaving by 9. After work, Cella returned to her modest two-bedroom apartment in a pre-war building, far from the glitzy high-rises that dominated Manhattan's skyline. The rent was reasonable thanks to rent control, and a landlord who appreciated tenants who paid on time and caused no trouble. She slipped into a simple black dress that she kept for occasions like this. Nothing flashy, but elegant enough not to stand out for the wrong reasons. Cella didn't believe in dressing to impress people she had no interest in impressing. "Pearl, I'm heading out to that museum thing," she called out to her godmother, who was watching her favorite game show from her bedroom. Pearl, a woman in her 70s with salt and pepper hair and keen eyes that missed nothing, looked up from the television. "About time you went somewhere besides this apartment and that museum basement." "I'm not going to meet men, Pearl, it's work." Pearl chuckled. "Honey, you should meet someone. You're young, beautiful, and too serious. Your mother would want you to live a little." Cella felt the familiar pang at the mention of her mother, who had passed away 5 years ago after a long battle with cancer. Pearl had been her mother's best friend, and when Pearl's Parkinson's had worsened last year, Cella hadn't hesitated to invite her to move in. "The nurse will be here in 20 minutes, Cella said, changing the subject. "I left dinner in the fridge. Just needs reheating." Go. Have fun for once." Pearl shooed her away with a smile. The museum's great hall had been transformed for the evening. Lights bathed the normally austere space in a warm glow, and the sound of a string quartet competed with the hum of conversations. Wealthy patrons in designer wear mingled with museum staff and board members. Cella grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, hoping the drink would make the next few hours more bearable. She spotted her boss, Henderson, waving her over to a group of older men in expensive suits. "And here she is," Henderson said with unusual enthusiasm. "Gentlemen, this is Cella Green, head of our archival department. She's been instrumental in digitizing our Civil War collection." Cella smiled politely as the men nodded with only mild interest. She knew their donations were vital to the museum's operations, but she had no patience for the social performance required to secure them. "If you'll excuse me," she said, after a few minutes of small talk. "I need to check on the display in the West Wing." She escaped to a quieter corner of the hall, where she could observe the party without being pulled into conversations about yacht clubs or summer homes in the Hamptons. "Not much of a mingler, are you?" The voice came from beside her. Smooth and confident, Cella turned to see a tall man with dark hair and the kind of face that probably got him whatever he wanted. His tailored suit screamed money, and his easy smile suggested he was used to attention. "Julian St. James," he said, extending his hand. "And you are?" Cella had seen his face in the papers often enough to recognize him, the real estate mogul who was regularly photographed with models and actresses on his arm. The city's most eligible bachelor, according to magazines she never read. "Cella Green," she replied, briefly taking his hand. "Cella," he repeated, as if testing how her name felt. "Can I buy you a drink?" She looked at the still full champagne glass in her hand and then back at him. "No, thank you. No." Without another word, she walked away, leaving Julian St. James staring after her with an expression of complete surprise. Sela moved through the crowd, finding Maddie by the dessert table. "You will not believe who just tried to pick me up," she whispered. Maddie's eyes widened. "Who?" "Julian St. James." "The Julian St. James? The one who bought that entire building on Fifth Avenue just because his ex-girlfriend wanted an apartment there. That's the one. And? What happened? Did he sweep you off your feet with promises of private jets and penthouse views?" Sela laughed. "I said no and walked away." Maddie nearly choked on her champagne. "You said no to Julian St. James, the man half of New York would kill to date?" "I'm not interested in men who think their bank accounts are personality traits," Sela said with a shrug. From across the room, she could feel eyes on her. Julian was watching her, a look of confusion on his face as if he was trying to solve a complicated puzzle. "He's staring at you," Maddie whispered. "Let him stare. I'm leaving soon anyway." But throughout the evening, Sela kept noticing Julian. He spoke with museum board members, laughed with old money families, but his eyes kept finding her. Not with the entitlement she expected, but with genuine curiosity. As promised, Sela left the gala at 9. She slipped out a side entrance, bypassing the line of town cars waiting for the wealthy patrons out front. The night air was cool, and she decided to walk a few blocks before hailing a cab. Leaving so soon, Julian had followed her outside. He stood a respectful distance away, hands in his pockets. "I have other commitments," she said simply. "Most people don't walk away from me," he said, and there was something refreshingly honest in his admission. "I'm not most people," Sela replied. "I'm beginning to see that." He took a step closer. "Let me drive you home." "No, thank you," Julian chuckled. "You really don't care who I am, do you?" "I know exactly who you are, Mr. St. James. That's why I'm saying no." Something flickered in his eyes, hurt, surprise, or maybe just the unfamiliar sting of rejection. "At least let me call you a car. I'm perfectly capable of getting myself home. I don't doubt your capabilities, Ms. Green. I was just raised to be a gentleman." Sela softened slightly. "Then be a gentleman and respect my answer." Julian nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. "Fair enough. Good night, Sela Green." "Good night, Mr. St. James." She turned and walked away, feeling his eyes on her back. For the first time in a long time, Sela felt a small thrill of something unexpected. Not attraction, she wouldn't allow herself that, but the satisfaction of standing her ground. The next morning, a massive arrangement of tulips arrived at the museum's archive department. The card simply read, "It was a pleasure meeting you." JSJ Sela rolled her eyes and instructed the delivery person to take them to the children's wing instead. "They'll appreciate them more there," she told Maddie, who was practically bouncing with excitement. "You can't just reject Julian St. James's flowers." "I just did," Sela said, returning to her work, but the flowers were just the beginning. The following week, an invitation arrived for a private viewing of a new exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art. Sela sent back a polite but firm decline. Then came a donation to the museum's educational program in her name, a substantial one, according to Henderson, who couldn't understand why Sela wasn't more pleased. "He's trying to buy my attention," she explained to Pearl that evening as they ate Chinese takeout in their living room. "As if I'm just another acquisition for his collection." Pearl studied her goddaughter with knowing eyes. "Or maybe he's trying to speak your language. Museum donations mean something to you in a way flowers and jewelry wouldn't. Or maybe he's used to getting what he wants and can't handle being told no," Pearl laughed. "That too." 3 weeks after the gala, Sela was surprised to see Julian's name on the list of attendees for a lecture series on Civil War correspondence. Hardly the glittering social event that would normally attract someone like him. When she entered the small auditorium, he was already seated in the back row. He wore a simple button-down shirt and jeans, looking less like the playboy from the papers, and more like anyone else interested in history. He nodded at her, but made no move to approach. Throughout the lecture, Sela found herself glancing back at him. He seemed genuinely engaged, taking notes and asking thoughtful questions during the Q&A. Afterward, as people filed out, he finally approached her. "That was fascinating," he said. "I had no idea how much information could be gleaned from the way people addressed letters during that period. Sela studied him, trying to detect any insincerity. Most people wouldn't find it fascinating. I'm not most people, he echoed her words from the night of the gala, a small smile playing at his lips. Despite herself, Sela laughed. Touché, Mr. St. James. Julian, please. Why are you here, Julian? There must be a dozen more exciting places for someone like you to be on a Thursday night. His expression grew serious. Someone like me? You know what I mean. I'm here because I wanted to see you again, he said simply, and because I figured this was the only invitation you wouldn't reject. His honesty caught her off guard. I'm not going to date you. I haven't asked you on a date yet. Sela crossed her arms. I'm not interested in being your latest conquest. What if I'm not interested in conquests anymore? His voice had lost its playful edge. There was something vulnerable in his eyes. That made Sela uncomfortable, as if he was showing her a side of himself that rarely saw daylight. I need to get home, she said, gathering her things. To your godmother, Julian asked. Sela's head snapped up. How do you know about Pearl? I did some research. I hope that's not creepy. I just wanted to understand why you're different. That is creepy, she confirmed, and I'm not a research project. Julian had the grace to look embarrassed. You're right, I apologize. It's just, you said no. And that's so unusual? Yes, he admitted. It is. They walked together toward the exit. Outside, the spring evening was mild, the city lights glowing against the darkening sky. Let me take you to dinner, Julian said. Just dinner, no strings, no expectations. I just want to talk to you. Sela hesitated. There was something about him that seemed almost desperate beneath the confidence. Why me? There are plenty of women who would jump at the chance. That's exactly why. You didn't jump. You walked away. You made me wonder what I was missing. She shook her head. That's not a good enough reason. Julian ran a hand through his hair, a surprisingly nervous gesture for someone who exuded such confidence. What if I told you that you're the first person in years who's made me feel like I need to earn something? That when you looked at me at that gala, I realized you were seeing Julian the person, not Julian St. James the brand. His words resonated with something deep inside Sela, but she pushed the feeling away. So I'm sorry, but no. The disappointment on his face was genuine. All right, but I'll be at the museum benefit next month. Maybe I'll see you there. Maybe, she allowed. As she watched him walk away, Sela felt a strange mix of relief and regret. There was something about Julian St. James that didn't quite fit with the image she'd constructed of him. Something real beneath the polished exterior. 2 days later, a package arrived at her apartment. Inside was a first edition of Letters from the Civil War, Voices of the Forgotten, a rare book she had once mentioned wanting to Henderson. There was no card, no grand gesture, just the book she had longed for. Pearl watched as Sela caressed the leather binding. From your admirer? He's not my admirer. Honey, that man is smitten. And from the look on your face, you're not as immune as you pretend to be. I don't have time for men like Julian St. James, Sela insisted. I have responsibilities. I have you to take care of. Pearl's face softened. Sela, you've spent your whole life taking care of others. First your mother, now me. When will you let someone take care of you? I don't need taking care of. Everyone needs someone, dear. Even strong, independent women like you. That night, Sela couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Julian's words, about the look in his eyes when she'd rejected him again. There had been something there, a loneliness that matched her own. The next morning, she arrived at work to find her office door closed. Strange, since she always left it open. When she pushed it open, she found a letter on her desk handwritten in bold, careful ink. You don't want the man the city sees, but I'm not him. I'm the man who watched you walk away and realized for the first time I was the one who wasn't enough. Sela sat down heavily, the letter trembling in her hands. For the first time since meeting Julian St. James, she wondered if she had misjudged him, and, more troublingly, if she was using her principles as a shield against the risk of truly opening her heart. Tentar novamente el Sela stared at Julian's handwritten letter for a long time. His words kept repeating in her mind. I was the one who wasn't enough. It seemed impossible that Julian St. James, a man whose face was plastered across business magazines and gossip columns alike, could feel inadequate around anyone, especially her. She carefully folded the letter and tucked it into her desk drawer. Despite her best efforts, something about his vulnerability had touched her. Still, she wasn't about to throw away years of carefully built boundaries because of one heartfelt note. "So what are you going to do about it?" Maddie asked later that day when Sela finally confided in her. "Nothing," Sela replied firmly. "My life is complicated enough." "Come on, Sela. When was the last time you even went on a date?" Sela frowned. "I don't have time for dating. Pearl needs me." "Pearl would be the first person to tell you to live your life," Maddie countered. "Besides, it's just dinner, not a marriage proposal." "With men like Julian, it's never just dinner," Sela said, shuffling some papers on her desk. "There are always strings attached." But Julian's words had planted a seed of doubt. What if there was more to him than the playboy persona the media portrayed? What if behind the wealth and the charm there was someone worth knowing? That evening, as Sela helped Pearl with her physical therapy exercises, her mind kept drifting to Julian. "You're awfully quiet tonight," Pearl observed, her keen eyes missing nothing. "Something on your mind?" "Just work stuff," Sela lied. Pearl gave her a knowing look. "Is work stuff 6 feet tall with dark hair and too much money?" Sela couldn't help but laugh. "How do you always know?" "Because I've known you since you were in diapers, honey. So what did the handsome millionaire do now?" "Billionaire, apparently," Sela corrected, then told Pearl about the letter. Pearl nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds like you've got him all turned around, or he's just used to getting what he wants and I'm a new challenge." "Maybe," Pearl agreed. "Or maybe he sees something in you that's worth pursuing." Sela helped Pearl to her chair and tucked a blanket around her legs. "Even if he's sincere, our worlds are too different. He lives in penthouses and flies in private jets. I live in a rent-controlled apartment and take the subway." "Your mother always said that the heart doesn't care about bank accounts," Pearl reminded her gently. "Mom also said to be careful who you give your heart to," Sela countered. "That some men are passing storms, not forever homes." Pearl took Sela's hand. "Your mother would want you to be happy, honey, not hiding away in this apartment with an old lady." "I'm not hiding," Sela protested. "And you're not just some old lady. I'm saying that life is meant to be lived. Maybe this Julian deserves at least a chance to prove he's more than what the tabloids say." The next day, a courier delivered another package to the museum. This time, it was a small, plain box. Inside was a simple silver key and a note that read, "8 p.m. tonight, Central Park South entrance. If you come, we'll go somewhere quiet to talk. If not, I understand. No more letters, no more gifts. Julian." Sela turned the key over in her palm. It wasn't attached to anything, had no marking, just a key like a symbol of something waiting to be unlocked. "You should go," Maddie urged when Sela showed her the key. "What's the worst that could happen?" "I could start caring about a man who lives his life in the public eye," Sela said. "A man whose world is completely different from mine. Or you could have dinner with an attractive, successful man who's clearly head over heels for you," Maddie countered. "Come on, Sela, take a chance." By the time Sela left work, she still hadn't decided what to do. She took the subway home, the key, heavy in her pocket. Pearl was having dinner with her card club friends, so the apartment was empty when Sela arrived. She stood in her bedroom, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her curly hair was pulled back in its usual practical style, her clothes simple and understated. Nothing about her screamed Julian Saint. James's type, which was precisely why his interest confused her. At 7:30, she made a decision. She changed into a simple blue dress, nothing fancy but nicer than her work clothes, and let her hair down. She applied a touch of lipstick, grabbed her purse and headed out before she could change her mind. The taxi dropped her at Central Park South at exactly 8 p.m. She half expected Julian not to be there, as if this had all been some elaborate game. But there he was, standing by the park entrance, no driver or assistant in sight. He wore dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt, his usual polished appearance toned down. When he saw her, his face lit up with genuine surprise and pleasure. "You came?" he said, as if he couldn't quite believe it. I came, Selah confirmed, feeling suddenly nervous. But I'm still not sure why. Julian smiled. That makes two of us. I honestly didn't think you would. He gestured toward the park. I thought we could walk. It's a nice night. Selah nodded, falling into step beside him. They walked in silence for a few minutes, the sounds of the city growing dimmer as they entered the park. So what's the key for? She finally asked. Julian looked embarrassed. It's stupid, really. I was going to take you to this little place I own downtown. It's not fancy, just a small apartment where I go when I need to escape. No staff, no press, no family expectations. Just a quiet place where I can be myself. You have an escape apartment? I know how it sounds, he admitted. Poor little rich boy needs to get away from his perfect life. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. I know what people think about men like me. Selah studied him. And what kind of man are you, Julian? He stopped walking and turned to face her. I'm still figuring that out. For a long time, I was the man everyone expected me to be. My father's son, the St. James heir, the charming bachelor. It's easier to play the role than to disappoint people. Is that why you're pursuing me? Because I didn't play my expected role. Julian smiled ruefully. Maybe at first, but the more I learn about you, the more I realize you're exactly what I've been missing. Someone real. They continued walking, the path lit by old-fashioned lamps. Around them, couples strolled. Hand in hand, tourists took photos and joggers hurried past. Tell me about your family, Selah said. Julian's expression tightened. The St. James dynasty? Not much to tell that isn't in the business sections. My father built an empire. My brother and I are expected to expand it. End of story. That's the public version, Selah pointed out. I want to know the real one. Julian was quiet for a moment. My father is a complicated man, brilliant in business, but demanding. Nothing is ever good enough. My brother, Alexander, has always been the favorite, the one who thinks exactly like Dad. I'm the disappointment who cares too much about the human side of business. What do you mean? I believe in building communities, not just buildings. In creating spaces where people can thrive, not just places to park money. Dad and Alexander see that as weakness. Selah was surprised by his passion. That doesn't sound like weakness to me. The company is under investigation, Julian said. Suddenly. The SEC is looking into some of our foreign dealings, deals that Alexander and my father pushed through despite my objections. Selah stopped walking. Why are you telling me this? Because you asked for the real story, Julian said simply. And because I'm tired of pretending everything is perfect when it's falling apart. His honesty was disarming. This wasn't the smooth-talking playboy from the tabloids. This was someone with real problems, real conflicts. I'm sorry, she said, don't be. It's refreshing to say it out loud to someone who isn't looking for a way to use it against me. They found a bench overlooking the lake and sat down. The night had grown cooler, and Selah wrapped her arms around herself. Without a word, Julian took off his jacket and placed it around her shoulders. The gesture was automatic, not calculated, and somehow that made it more meaningful. Your turn, he said. Tell me something real about Selah Green. She hesitated, then decided to match his honesty with her own. I've been taking care of people all my life. My mother got sick when I was in college, cancer. I moved back home to help her through treatments, finished my degree online while working part-time. After she died, Pearl started showing symptoms of Parkinson's. She was my mom's best friend, had no other family. So she moved in with me. You put your life on hold for them, Julian observed. I made choices, Selah corrected, the right ones for me. But sometimes you wonder what it would be like to put yourself first, Julian finished for her. She nodded, surprised by how easily he understood. That's why you work with archives, isn't it? He asked, preserving other people's stories when you haven't had the chance to live your own. Selah had never thought of it that way, but the insight struck a chord. Maybe. Or maybe I just like old things. They have depth, character. They've survived. Like you, Julian said softly. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Selah felt a connection. She hadn't expected, a recognition of something shared despite their different worlds. The moment was broken by Julian's phone buzzing. He glanced at it and frowned. My brother. I should take this. While Julian stepped away to take the call, Sela watched the moonlight on the lake, trying to make sense of her feelings. There was something genuine about Julian that she hadn't anticipated. A vulnerability beneath the confidence that made him human, flawed, real. When he returned, his expression was troubled. I'm sorry, but I need to go. There's a situation at the office. Is everything okay? Just the usual family drama, he said with a forced smile. But I'd like to see you again, Sela. Properly this time. Dinner, maybe? She hesitated, then nodded. Okay, dinner. The smile that broke across his face was worth the risk. Tomorrow? I know a little place in the village. Nothing fancy, I promise. Tomorrow, she agreed. He walked her to the park exit and hailed a cab. Before she got in, he took her hand. Thank you for coming tonight, for giving me a chance. Don't make me regret it, she warned, but there was a smile in her eyes. I'll do my best, he promised. As the cab pulled away, Sela realized she was still wearing Julian's jacket. She pulled it closer around her, breathing in his subtle cologne, and wondered what exactly she had gotten herself into. The next evening, Julian picked her up in a modest sedan, not the flashy sports car she had expected. He took her to a small Italian restaurant tucked away on a side street in Greenwich Village. The owner greeted him by name, leading them to a quiet table in the back. I've been coming here for years, Julian explained. Best pasta in the city, and they couldn't care less about who I am or how much money I have. Sela was impressed despite herself. The restaurant was charming and unpretentious, exactly the kind of place she would have chosen. Over dinner, they talked about everything and nothing. Books they loved, places they wanted to visit, childhood memories. Julian told her about growing up in the shadow of his father's success, about feeling like nothing he did was ever quite right. When my mother left, I was 10, he said, swirling the wine in his glass. She couldn't handle the pressure of being St. James. Dad was always working, always demanding perfection. She just broke one day, packed a bag and disappeared. That must have been hard, Sela said softly. Julian nodded. After that, I tried even harder to be what my father wanted, to be perfect, but it was never enough. And now I'm trying to figure out who I am without all that, who Julian is beneath the St. James legacy. As the evening progressed, Sela found herself relaxing, laughing, sharing parts of herself she usually kept private. She told him about her dreams of traveling the world, about the novel she'd started writing but never finished. Why didn't you finish it? He asked. Life got in the way, she said simply. Mom got sick and suddenly writing seemed indulgent. It's not indulgent to pursue your passion, Julian argued. It's necessary, says the man who's never had to. Worry about paying rent, Sela teased. Instead of being offended, Julian laughed. Fair point, but I still think you should finish your book. After dinner, they walked through the village, stopping at a small jazz club where they listened to music and talked until midnight. When Julian finally drove her home, Sela was surprised by how much she'd enjoyed the evening. I'd invite you up, but Pearl will be waiting with a million questions, she said as they parked outside her building. I can handle questions, Julian smiled. But it's late. Another time. Before she got out of the car, he reached for her hand. Sela, I want to see you again. Not just once. Not just dinner. I want to see where this goes. The intensity in his eyes made her heart race. I don't know, Julian. Our lives are so different. Maybe that's exactly why we need each other, he said. You remind me what's real, what matters. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. But Sela didn't pull away. Instead, she met him halfway, their lips coming together in a kiss that was gentle at first, then deeper, more urgent. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. I should go, Sela whispered. Julian nodded, but neither moved. One more thing, he said. There's a charity event next weekend for children's arts education. Will you come with me? As your date. Sela raised an eyebrow. Won't that make the gossip columns? Probably, he admitted. Does that bother you? She thought about it. Yes, but maybe not enough to say no. His smile was worth the risk. I'll pick you up at 7 on Saturday. Inside her apartment, Pearl was still awake, watching late-night television in the living room. "Well, well," she said with a knowing smile. "Look who's coming home after midnight." "Don't start," Selah warned, but she couldn't keep the smile from her face. "That good, huh?" Pearl teased. Selah sank onto the couch beside her godmother. "I don't know what I'm doing, Pearl. He's everything I've always avoided. Wealthy, high profile, complicated." "He's also got you smiling like I haven't seen in years," Pearl observed. "Sometimes the right person is the last one you'd expect." The week that followed was a whirlwind. Julian called her every day, sometimes just to hear her voice for a few minutes between meetings. They met for lunch when their schedules allowed and twice more for dinner. Each time they were together, Selah discovered more layers to Julian St. James. He was thoughtful, intelligent and surprisingly down-to-earth when away from the spotlight. He listened when she talked about her work, asked questions, remembered details that most people would forget. But there were shadows too. Sometimes his phone would ring and his expression would darken. He would step away to take calls from his father or brother, returning with tension in his shoulders and a forced smile. "Is everything okay at work?" Selah asked one evening as they walked along the Hudson River. Julian sighed. "It's complicated. My father and Alexander are pushing through a development project in Harlem, the kind that displaces long-time residents and turns affordable housing into luxury condos. And you disagree?" "I think there's a way to develop communities without destroying them," Julian said. "But I'm outnumbered on the board. My father still has controlling interest, and most of the board members owe their positions to him. Can't you just walk away? Start your own company with your own values?" Julian laughed bitterly. "The St. James name comes with golden handcuffs, Selah. I've tried to leave before. My father made it clear that would mean war, not just with him, but with every contact and connection he's cultivated over 40 years in this business." Selah squeezed his hand. "That sounds like a prison." "It is," he admitted. "But lately I've been thinking maybe it's worth the fight. Maybe some things are worth standing up for, even if it costs me everything." The way he looked at her made it clear he wasn't just talking about business. Saturday arrived, and with it the charity gala. Selah spent more time than usual getting ready, trying on 3 different dresses before deciding on a simple but elegant burgundy gown she'd worn to a cousin's wedding. Pearl watched from the doorway, her eyes twinkling. "You look beautiful, honey." "It's not too simple?" Selah asked, suddenly nervous. "These events are usually full of designer dresses and diamonds." "You've never cared about that before," Pearl reminded her. "I know. But this is Julian's world." "I don't want to embarrass him." Pearl crossed the room and took Selah's hands. "If he's embarrassed by you, he doesn't deserve you. But something tells me that's not going to be a problem." When Julian arrived, his reaction confirmed Pearl's words. He stared at Selah with such open admiration that she felt a blush creep up her cheeks. "You look absolutely stunning," he said. Before they left, Julian insisted on meeting Pearl properly. The two hit it off immediately, with Pearl telling embarrassing stories about Selah as a child, and Julian hanging on every word. "I like him," Pearl whispered as Selah helped her to her room before leaving. "He looks at you like you're the only woman in the world." The charity gala was held at the Plaza Hotel, the grand ballroom transformed into a showcase for children's artwork. Photographers lined the red carpet at the entrance, calling out to the celebrities and socialites as they arrived. Selah tensed as their car pulled up. "I'm not used to this," she admitted. Julian squeezed her hand. "Just smile and keep walking. They won't bite." But as they stepped onto the red carpet, the flashbulbs exploded. "Julian, Julian, who's your date?" the photographers called. Julian placed a protective arm around Selah's waist, guiding her through the gauntlet of cameras. "Just smile," he whispered. "You're doing great." Inside, the ballroom was a sea of designer gowns and tuxedos. Selah immediately felt out of place, but Julian kept her close, introducing her to people he knew, making sure she was never left alone. "Julian, darling." A tall, elegant woman in her 50s approached them, air-kissing Julian on both cheeks. "Where have you been hiding? We've missed you at the club." "I've been busy, Diane," Julian said politely. "Diane, this is Selah Green." Seller Diane Hartley, an old family friend. Diane's eyes swept over Seller, taking in her dress and lack of jewelry with poorly disguised judgment. How lovely. And what do you do, dear? I'm an archivist at the Metropolitan Museum, Seller replied. How interesting, Diane said, in a tone that suggested the opposite. Julian, your father was looking for you earlier. Something about that situation in Harlem. Julian's smile tightened. I'll find him later. If you'll excuse us, I promised Seller a tour of the children's artwork. As they walked away, Seller could feel Diane's eyes on her back. She doesn't approve of me, she observed. Diane doesn't approve. Of anything that isn't at least 100 years old and worth millions, Julian said. Ignore her. But Diane wasn't the only one. Throughout the evening, Seller noticed the looks, the whispers, the curious glances. She was clearly not what people expected to see on Julian St. James' arm. Julian. A deep voice cut through the crowd, a tall man with silver hair, and Julian's same sharp jawline approached them. I've been looking for you. Julian's posture changed immediately, his spine straightening, his expression becoming more guarded. Dad, I didn't know you were coming. Tonight. Clearly, his father said, his eyes flicking to Seller with open curiosity. Aren't you going to introduce me to your friend? Seller Green, this is my father, Richard St. James. Dad, this is Seller. Richard extended his hand. His grip was firm, his gaze assessing. A pleasure, Ms. Green. I don't believe I've seen you at these events before. This is my first, Seller admitted. Seller works at the Metropolitan Museum, Julian added. She's head of the archival department. Richard raised an eyebrow. How impressive. If you'll excuse us, Ms. Green, I need to borrow my son for a moment. Business matters. Before Seller could respond, Richard was already leading Julian away. Julian threw an apologetic look over his shoulder, mouthing, I'll be right back. Left alone, Seller made her way to the display of children's artwork. She was studying a particularly charming painting of a giraffe when she sensed someone beside her. So you're Julian's latest distraction. The man beside her looked like a younger version of Richard St. James, but with colder eyes. Alexander, Julian's brother. I don't believe we've been introduced, Seller said coolly. Alexander St. James, he confirmed. And you're the museum girl who's got my brother skipping board meetings and challenging our father's decisions. I don't know what you're talking about. Alexander laughed, the sound sharp and humorless. Julian's never cared about that Harlem project one way or another until recently. Now suddenly he's threatening to go public with concerns, to vote against the family. That started right around the time you appeared. Julian makes his own decisions, Seller said firmly. For now, Alexander agreed, but you should know that the St. James family has weathered far worse storms than a pretty girl with principles. Julian will remember where his loyalties lie. He always does. Before Seller could respond, Julian returned, his face tight with anger. When he saw Alexander beside her, his expression darkened further. Everything okay here? He asked, placing a protective hand on Seller's back. Just introducing myself to your date, Alexander said smoothly. Lovely to meet you, Ms. Green. I'm sure we'll be seeing more of each other. As Alexander walked away, Julian turned to Seller. What did he say to you? Nothing important, Seller assured him. What did your father want? Julian's jaw tightened. To remind me of my responsibilities to the family name. He heard I've been questioning the Harlem project. Is that my fault? No, Julian said firmly. It's because it's the right thing to do. My father just doesn't like that I'm finally standing up to him. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Julian was distracted, checking his phone frequently, his usual charm replaced by a preoccupied frown. By the time they left, Seller's earlier happiness had been replaced by doubt. I don't fit in your world, Julian, she said as they drove back to her apartment. Those people tonight, they looked at me like I was an exotic pet you'd brought to show off. I don't care what they think, Julian insisted. All that matters is what we think, how we feel. And how do you feel? Seller asked quietly. Julian pulled the car over and turned to face her. I feel like for the first time in my life I'm with someone who sees me, really sees me. Not the St. James heir, not the billionaire, just Julian. And that terrifies me and thrills me at the same time. He took her hands in his. I'm falling in love with you, Sela Green, and I don't care if that complicates my life or pisses off my family or makes me rethink everything I thought I knew. It's worth it. You're worth it. His words hung in the bar. Air between them, raw and honest and frightening in their intensity. Sela's heart pounded in her chest. This was exactly what she'd feared, that Julian would crash into her carefully ordered life like a tidal wave, sweeping away all her careful boundaries. Julian, Her phone rang, cutting her off. It was the night nurse who stayed with Pearl when Sela was out. I have to take this, she said, grateful for the interruption. The nurse's voice was tense. Ms. Green, you need to come home. Your godmother has fallen. The paramedics are here. We're taking her to Mount Sinai. Sela's world narrowed to a pinpoint of fear. I'll be right there. Tell her I'm coming. She turned to Julian, her face pale. It's Pearl. She's fallen. They're taking her to the hospital. Without hesitation, Julian put the car in drive. I'll get you there. As they raced through the nighttime streets, Sela's mind was filled with terrible possibilities. Pearl was all the family she had left. The thought of losing her was unbearable. Julian reached across the console to take her hand. She'll be okay, he said softly. We'll make sure of it. We. The word echoed in Sela's mind as they pulled up to the emergency entrance. For the first time since her mother died, she wasn't facing a crisis alone. And despite all her doubts, all her fears about Julian St. James and his complicated world, in that moment, she was grateful he was by her side. As they rushed through the hospital doors, Sela realized that whatever happened next, her life had already changed. The question now was whether she was brave enough to let it. Tentar Nova Mentel, the emergency room was crowded and chaotic. Sela rushed to the front desk, Julian close behind her. I'm looking for my godmother, Pearl Jenkins, she said, her voice tight with fear. She was brought in by ambulance. The nurse checked her computer. She's being examined now. If you'll take a seat in the waiting area, the doctor will speak with you soon. Sela paced the waiting room, unable to sit still. Julian watched her, his face etched with concern. Can I get you anything? He asked. Coffee? Water? She shook her head. I should have been there. She's been having trouble with her balance lately, but I went to that stupid gala instead. Julian took her hands, stopping her mid-pace. This isn't your fault, Sela. You can't be there every second. She's all I have left, Sela whispered, her voice breaking. Without a word, Julian pulled her into his arms. For once, Sela didn't resist. She leaned into his strength, letting him support her when her own strength faltered. Ms. Green? Doctor in scrubs approached them. I'm Dr. Reynolds. I've been examining your godmother. Sela pulled away from Julian, straightening her spine. How is she? She's stable. The fall resulted in a broken hip, which is serious at her age, but there are no signs of stroke or other complications. We'll need to operate to repair the hip. When? Sela asked. Tomorrow morning. We've given her something for the pain and she's resting now. You can see her briefly if you'd like. Sela nodded gratefully. Yes, please. The doctor led them down a corridor to a curtained area. Pearl looked small and fragile in the hospital bed, her silver hair spread across the pillow. Her eyes were closed, her breathing steady. Oh, Pearl, Sela whispered, taking her godmother's hand. Pearl's eyes fluttered open. There you are, honey. I'm sorry about all this fuss. Don't be ridiculous, Sela said, blinking back tears. How are you feeling? Like I've been hit by a truck, Pearl admitted with a weak smile. But they've given me the good drugs, so I can't complain too much. Her gaze shifted to Julian, who stood respectfully at the foot of the bed. You brought your young man. Good. Julian stepped forward. I'm so sorry about your fall, Miss Jenkins. Pearl, please, she corrected him. And it's not your fault I'm old and clumsy. A nurse approached them. I'm sorry, but visiting hours are over. Ms. Jenkins needs her rest before surgery. Sela leaned down to kiss Pearl's forehead. I'll be back first thing in the morning. Don't worry about me, Pearl told her. I'm tougher than I look. Outside Pearl's room, Sela turned to Julian. You should go home. There's nothing more we can do tonight. I'm not leaving you alone, Julian said firmly. Not unless you really want me to. The conviction in his voice touched something deep inside Sela. For someone who had spent her life being the strong one, the caretaker, the feeling of being cared for was both foreign and comforting. "I don't want to be alone," she admitted. They drove to Selah's apartment in silence. Inside, the space felt emptier without Pearl's presence. Selah moved through the rooms like a ghost, picking up a fallen Afghan, straightening Pearl's slippers by her favorite chair. "The surgery has a high success rate," Julian said, following her into the kitchen. "Dr. Reynolds is one of the best orthopedic surgeons in the city." Selah looked at him. "How do you know that?" "I made a call while you were with Pearl," he admitted. "I wanted to make sure she was getting the best care possible." "Julian, you didn't have to—" "I wanted to," he interrupted. "Let me help, Selah, please." She sank into a kitchen chair, suddenly exhausted. "I don't know what happens now. Pearl will need rehabilitation, specialized care. The nurse was already talking about a facility, but I can't bear the thought of her in some institution." Julian sat across from her. "We'll figure it out together." "Why?" Selah asked, the question that had been lurking in her mind since he'd first approached her at the gala. "Why are you doing all this? You barely know me." Julian reached across the table to take her hand. "Because when I'm with you, I feel like the person I want to be, not the person everyone expects me to be. Because you challenge me, frustrate me, fascinate me. Because when I saw your face in that hospital, I realized I would do anything to take away your pain." His words hung in the air between them, honest and raw. Selah felt the last of her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. "Stay tonight," she said softly. "Just to sleep. I don't want to be alone." In the bedroom, Selah lent Julian a t-shirt that had belonged to her father. They lay side by side in her modest queen-sized bed, not touching at first, both staring at the ceiling. "Tell me something I don't know about you," Selah said into the darkness. Julian was quiet for a moment. "I wanted to be an architect when I was younger, not a developer, but someone who actually designs spaces that change how people feel, how they live." "Why didn't you?" "My father said it was beneath a St. James to work for someone else. That we build empires, not buildings." His voice was soft with old disappointment. "What about you? Tell me something I don't know." "I'm afraid," Selah admitted. "All the time, afraid of losing Pearl, afraid of being alone, afraid of taking chances. I pretend to be strong and independent, but mostly I'm just scared." Julian rolled onto his side to face her. "Being afraid doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." Selah turned to look at him, their faces close in the darkness. "I'm afraid of this too. Of you. Of us." "I know," he said, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Me too." She moved closer, seeking comfort in his warmth. Julian wrapped his arms around her, and they fell asleep that way, holding each other in the quiet darkness. Morning came too soon. They arrived at the hospital early in time to see Pearl before she was taken to surgery. She seemed smaller in the hospital bed, but her spirit was undimmed. "You two look tired," she observed. "I hope you got some sleep." "Stop worrying about us," Selah said, squeezing her hand. "Just focus on getting better." Pearl looked at Julian, who stood slightly behind Selah. "You take care of my girl while I'm in there, you hear me?" Julian nodded solemnly. "Yes, Mom." The hours of surgery were the longest of Selah's life. She and Julian sat in the waiting room, drinking bad coffee and making small talk to distract themselves from the worry. "Tell me about your book," Julian said, after they'd exhausted conversations about the weather and hospital cafeteria food. Selah looked surprised. "You remembered that?" "I remember everything you tell me," he said simply. She smiled, touched by his attention. "It's nothing special, just a historical novel set during the Civil War, based on some of the letters I've archived. A love story, actually, between a Union soldier and a Southern girl who helps fugitive slaves escape." "It sounds fascinating," Julian said. "Why did you stop writing it?" "Life got in the way," Selah shrugged. "Mom got sick, then there was grad school, then Pearl. There was never enough time or energy left for something as frivolous as writing." "It's not frivolous to pursue your passion," Julian argued. "It's essential." Before Selah could respond, Dr. Reynolds appeared, still in his surgical scrubs. They both stood, tension radiating from them. "The surgery went well," he said with a reassuring smile. "We've repaired the hip with a partial replacement. She's in recovery now." Selah nearly collapsed with relief. Julian's arm went around her waist, supporting her. "When can we see her?" he asked. "In about an hour. But I do need to discuss the recovery process with you, Ms. Green. Your godmother will need extensive physical therapy and round-the-clock care for at least 6 weeks." Selah nodded. "I'll take time off work." Dr. Reynolds looked concerned. "Even with help, your apartment might not be the best environment for her recovery. There are excellent rehabilitation facilities." "No," Selah interrupted. "She's not going to a facility. I'll figure something out." Julian had been quiet, listening, but now he spoke up. What if there was another option? Both Selah and the doctor looked at him. "I have a house in Connecticut," Julian explained. "It's all on one level, wheelchair accessible, with a guest house where a nurse could stay. It's peaceful, with gardens Pearl could enjoy as she recovers." Selah stared at him. "Julian, we can't impose on you like that." "You wouldn't be imposing. The house sits empty most of the time, and it's only an hour from the city, so you could still commute to work if you needed to." Dr. Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. "That kind of arrangement would be ideal for recovery if it's a serious offer." "It is," Julian assured him. Later, when they were alone outside Pearl's recovery room, Selah confronted him. "Julian, I appreciate the offer, but we barely know each other. Moving into your house is a huge step." "I understand," he said, "but it's the best solution for Pearl, and I wouldn't be there most of the time anyway. I have to be in the city for work. You would have the place to yourselves." Selah studied his face, looking for ulterior motives, but found only genuine concern. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I care about you," he said simply. "And Pearl matters to you. So she matters to me too." It was the most straightforward declaration of feelings Selah had ever received, with no games, no flowery words, just honest emotion. It disarmed her completely. "I'll think about it," she promised. Pearl's recovery from anesthesia was slow but steady. By evening, she was alert enough to understand what had happened and what lay ahead. 6 weeks of physical therapy, she groaned. "At my age, I'll be lucky if I ever walk properly again." "Don't talk like that," Selah scolded gently. "You'll recover completely and I'll be with you every step of the way." Pearl's shrewd eyes studied her goddaughter. "And how exactly are you planning to manage that while working full-time?" Selah hesitated, then glanced at Julian, who sat quietly in the corner of the room. "Julian has offered us his house in Connecticut for your recovery. It's accessible, peaceful, and far from your job," Pearl finished for her. "I can commute or take a leave of absence." Pearl shook her head. "I won't have you putting your life on hold for me again. You did enough of that with your mother." "It's not the same," Selah protested. "No, it's worse because I'm not even your blood relation. I'm just an old woman who's overstayed her welcome in your life." "Pearl?" Selah was shocked by her godmother's words. "That's not true. You're my family." Julian cleared his throat. "If I may," he said, approaching the bed. "Pearl, Selah loves you. Helping you recover isn't a burden to her. It's what she wants to do. But I understand your concern about her career. What if we found a compromise?" Both women looked at him expectantly. The Connecticut house is equipped with high-speed internet. Selah could work remotely part of the time, come into the city when necessary, and I'd hire the best physical therapist in the state to come to the house daily. Pearl considered this, then turned to Selah. "You really want to do this? Move to Connecticut with a man you've known for what? A month?" 3 weeks, Selah admitted with a small smile. "But yes, I want to be there for your recovery. And Julian's offer makes the most sense." Pearl's eyes moved between the two of them, shrewd and assessing. "Well," she finally said, "I suppose I should be grateful for all this fuss. But Julian, you should know that if you break my goddaughter's heart, I may be old, but I still remember how to make a man regret being born." Julian laughed, but his eyes were serious. "I believe you, Pearl, and I have no intention of hurting." "Selah, good," Pearl nodded. "Then I accept your generous offer, but I'm paying for the nurse." "Pearl, you can't afford," Selah began. "I have savings," Pearl interrupted. "And I won't be a charity case. My pride couldn't take it." Julian nodded. Respectfully, We'll work something out. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Julian arranged for Pearl to be transferred to a private room with round-the-clock nursing. Sela took a 2-week leave from the museum, promising to work remotely after that. She packed essentials for herself and Pearl, arranged for a neighbor to check on the apartment, and tried not to think too hard about what she was doing, moving temporarily into Julian St. James's house, accepting his help, his concern, his growing presence in her life. It was everything she'd sworn to avoid, and yet here she was letting down her guard, taking a chance. On the day of Pearl's discharge, Julian arrived at the hospital with a wheelchair-accessible van. Pearl was still weak but determined to maintain. Her dignity as the nurses helped her into the vehicle. "Your chariot awaits, my lady," Julian said with a playful bow that made Pearl laugh despite her discomfort. The drive to Connecticut took just over an hour. As they turned off the main road, onto a tree-lined drive, Sela gasped. Julian had described the property as a house, but what came into view was a sprawling estate. A beautiful colonial-style mansion surrounded by manicured gardens and ancient oak trees. "You didn't mention it was a palace," she said, trying to hide her shock. Julian looked embarrassed. "It's not that big really, just 5 bedrooms. It was my grandmother's favorite place." The inside of the house was even more impressive than the exterior. High ceilings, hardwood floors, antique furniture mixed with modern amenities. Everything spoke of old money and understated elegance. Pearl was installed in a spacious first-floor bedroom with its own sitting area and private bathroom. The room had clearly been prepared with care. Fresh flowers on the bedside table, a stack of books Pearl had mentioned enjoying, even her favorite brand of tea on a small kitchenette. "I hope it's comfortable," Julian said, hovering awkwardly, as Pearl was settled into bed by the nurse he'd hired. "If you need anything else, just let Mrs. Winters know. She's the housekeeper, and she lives on the property." Pearl looked around the luxurious room and shook her head in wonder. "I think I've died and gone to heaven." Sela was shown to a bedroom on the 2nd floor, a beautiful space with a 4-poster bed and windows overlooking the garden. Her few belongings looked out of place among the luxury. "The room next door is set up as an office," Julian told. "I had them install a new computer and whatever else you might need for working remotely." "Julian, this is all too much," Sela said, overwhelmed by his generosity. He shook his head. "It's not enough. Not for what you deserve." Their eyes met, and the air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken emotions. Julian took a step closer, then stopped himself. "I should go check on Pearl," he said, his voice husky. "There's a car in the garage for your use while you're here. The keys are in the kitchen. Mrs. Winters will show you around tomorrow." "You're not staying?" Sela asked, surprised by her own disappointment. "I have meetings in the city tomorrow," Julian explained, "but I'll be back on Friday, if that's okay." "It's your house," Sela reminded him, "but it's your space now," he countered. "I don't want to intrude." His consideration touched her. "Friday would be nice," she said softly. After he left, Sela stood at the window, watching his car disappear down the driveway. She felt a strange mixture of emotions, gratitude, confusion, and a growing attraction she could no longer deny. The next few days settled into a routine. Pearl's physical therapist came every morning, pushing her through exercises that left her exhausted but determined. The nurse, a kind woman named Gloria, stayed in the guest house and helped with medications and daily care. Sela split her time between caring for Pearl and working remotely, catching up on museum correspondence and research. Mrs. Winters, the elderly housekeeper, kept the house running smoothly, preparing meals and ensuring everything was comfortable. By Friday, Sela found herself watching the clock, anticipating Julian's return with an eagerness that both thrilled and terrified her. When his car finally pulled up the driveway, she had to stop herself from running to greet him. He arrived bearing gifts, a new novel Pearl had mentioned wanting to read, a bottle of Sela's favorite wine, how had he remembered, and a thick folder of papers under his arm. "How's our patient?" he asked, finding them in the garden where Pearl was practicing walking with her walker. "Stubborn," Sela answered with a smile. "Determined," Pearl corrected her. "There's a difference." Julian spent the evening with them, sharing dinner and listening to Pearl's stories about her youth. Selah watched him, struck by how naturally he fit into their small family circle, how genuinely interested he seemed in Pearl's rambling tales. Later, after Pearl had gone to bed, Selah and Julian sat on the terrace, sharing the wine he'd brought. "Thank you," she said softly, "for all of this, for being so kind to Pearl." "I like her," Julian said simply. "She reminds me of my grandmother, tough, no nonsense, but with a big heart." "She likes you too," Selah admitted. "She's not usually so quick to trust people." Julian smiled. "And you? Do you trust me yet?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Selah considered her answer carefully. "I'm getting there," she finally said. "It's not easy for me." "I know," Julian acknowledged, "and I don't take it personally. You've had to be strong for so long, it's hard to let someone else in." His understanding moved her. Most men would have been offended by her hesitancy, would have pushed for more or simply walked away. But Julian seemed content to wait, to give her the time she needed. "What's in the folder you brought?" she asked, changing the subject. Julian looked momentarily hesitant. "Actually, it's something I wanted to discuss with you. The Harlem Development Project I told you about." He spread the papers on the table between them. Plans, financial reports, community impact studies. "My father and Alexander are pushing for luxury condos, retail spaces targeted at upper-income residents, the kind of development that changes the character of a neighborhood overnight and prices out the people who've lived there for generations." Selah studied the documents. "And you disagree?" "I have an alternative proposal," Julian said, his voice animated with passion. "Mixed-income housing, community spaces, local businesses, development that serves the existing community while bringing in new resources. It would still be profitable, just not as quickly or dramatically as what my father wants." "And the board is siding with your father?" Julian nodded grimly. "Most of them, but I'm making a last stand at Monday's meeting. I've been gathering support from community leaders, collecting data on sustainable development models." "Why is this so important to you?" Selah asked. Julian was quiet for a moment. "My grandmother, my mother's mother, grew up in Harlem. Before, she married my grandfather and became a St. James. She never forgot where she came from, always made sure I understood that our privilege came with responsibility." He looked at Selah, his eyes intense. "The St. James name has been built on development. That often destroys more than it creates. I want to change that legacy." Selah reached across the table to take his hand. "Then you should fight for it." Julian squeezed her hand, his eyes grateful for her support. "Even if it means going against my family, risking my position in the company." "Especially." "Then," Selah said firmly, "some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost." Later that night, as Selah prepared for bed, her phone rang. It was Maddie from the museum. "How's Connecticut?" Maddie asked. "Living the high life with your billionaire boyfriend?" Selah laughed. "He's not my boyfriend, and Pearl is doing better, thanks for asking." "Henderson wants to know when you're coming back," Maddie said. "The temp they hired is useless. I'll be back part-time next week," Selah promised. "Working remotely most days, but I'll come in for meetings." "Good," Maddie said. "Oh, and you might want to check this week's society pages. You're trending." Selah's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "You and Julian at the charity gala. The papers are calling you the mystery woman who tamed the Playboy tycoon. There are pictures and everything." After hanging up, Selah searched online and found the articles Maddie had mentioned. Photos of her and Julian at the gala, speculation about their relationship, details about her job at the museum. One particularly invasive piece even mentioned Pearl's accident and their move to Julian's Connecticut property. She was still staring at her phone when Julian knocked on her bedroom door. "Selah, everything okay?" "I heard your voice." She opened the door, holding out her phone. "Did you see these?" Julian scanned the articles, his expression darkening. "I'm sorry. I should have warned you this might happen. They're talking about Pearl, about my job. How did they even find out about the accident?" "My family has enemies," Julian said grimly. "People who watch everything we do, looking for leverage, and the press feeds on gossip about us. It sells papers." Selah sank onto the edge of the bed. suddenly overwhelmed. "I didn't sign up for this, Julian. I like my privacy. I like being anonymous." Julian sat beside her, careful to maintain some distance. "I understand. And if you want me to make a statement, ask them to back off, I will." "Would it help?" "Probably not," he admitted. "It might even make things worse. The best approach is usually to ignore it until they lose interest and move on to the next story." Sela rubbed her temples, feeling a headache coming on. "This is exactly why I said no to you in the first place. Your life is a public spectacle." "Parts of it are," Julian agreed, "but not the parts that matter, not this." He gestured between them. "What's real between us is private, Sela. They can speculate and photograph and write their stories, but they can't touch what's real." His words calmed her somewhat. "I just need to process this. It's a lot to take in." Julian stood. "I understand. Get some rest. We can talk more tomorrow." But as he turned to leave, Sela caught his hand. "Stay," she said softly, "just to sleep, like before." The vulnerability in her voice touched Julian deeply. Without a word, he slipped off his shoes and lay down beside her on the bed. Sela turned, off the light, and curled against him, finding comfort in his solid presence. "Julian," she whispered in the darkness. "Yes, I'm starting to trust you. Just so you know." He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Thank you for telling me." The weekend passed too quickly. They spent Saturday exploring the grounds, Julian showing Sela his grandmother's rose garden and the small lake at the edge of the property. Pearl joined them for short periods, determined to build her strength by walking a little further each day. On Sunday evening, Julian prepared to return to the city for Monday's board meeting. As they stood by his car, Sela felt a strange reluctance to see him go. "Good luck tomorrow," she said. "With the board." Julian smiled, but there was tension in his eyes. "Thanks. I'll need it. Call me afterward. Let me know how it goes." "I will," he promised. The moment felt weighted with unspoken emotions. Julian reached out to touch her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "These past few days with you and Pearl, it's the closest thing to a real family I've had in a long time." His honesty disarmed her completely. Without overthinking, Sela leaned forward and kissed him, pouring into the gesture all the feelings she wasn't ready to put into words. When they finally broke apart, Julian looked stunned. "What was that for?" "For being who you are," Sela said simply, "not who everyone expects you to be." He kissed her again, more deeply this time, his hands tangling in her hair. "I'm falling in love with you, Sela Green," he whispered against her lips. "I think I have been since you first said no to me." Before she could respond, his phone rang, his father's ringtone. Reality intruded on their moment. "I have to take this," Julian said apologetically. "I'll call you tomorrow." Sela nodded, stepping back. "Drive safely." She watched him drive away, his words echoing in her mind. "I'm falling in love with you." The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Monday brought a return to routine. Sela worked remotely in the morning, joined Pearl for physical therapy, then prepared to drive into the city for a meeting with Henderson. She tried not to check her phone constantly, wondering how Julian's board meeting was going. By late afternoon, she still hadn't heard from him. The museum meeting had gone well. Henderson was pleased with her remote work arrangement and relieved to know she'd be back in person at least one day a week. She was driving back to Connecticut when her phone finally rang. But it wasn't Julian's number on the screen. It was a New York area code she didn't recognize. "Hello?" she answered cautiously. "Is this Sela Green?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, who's calling?" "This is Nicole Wright from the New York Times. I'm hoping to get your comment on Julian St. James's resignation from St. James Development." Sela nearly swerved off the road. "His what?" "Mr. St. James resigned from his family's company this afternoon, following a contentious board meeting. As his girlfriend, I thought you might have some insight into his decision." "I have no comment," Sela said firmly, ending the call. Her hands shook as she pulled over to the side of the road. Julian had resigned? Why hadn't he called her? What had happened at that meeting? She dialed his number, but it went straight to voicemail. "Julian, it's me. I just heard. Please call me." Back at the house, Mrs. Winters greeted her with concern. "There's been quite a commotion, Miss Green. Reporters calling all afternoon, asking about Mr. Julian." "Has he called?" Sela asked anxiously. "No, miss, but there was a delivery for you." She handed Sela a small envelope. Inside was a key, the same simple silver key Julian had given her when he first asked her to meet him. Attached was a note with an address in the city. "If you want to find me." Sela recognized the address, the escape apartment Julian had mentioned, where he went when he needed to be away from his family and the public eye. "Mrs. Winters, I need to go back to the city," Sela said. "Can you stay with Pearl tonight?" "Of course, dear. Is everything all right?" "I don't know," Sela admitted, "but I need to find out." The drive back to Manhattan felt endless. Night had fallen by the time Sela parked near the address Julian had given her. It was in the West Village, a pre-war building with no doorman, nothing to suggest it housed an heir to one of the city's largest fortunes. The key fit smoothly into the lock of apartment 3B. Sela hesitated, then pushed the door open. The apartment was small but beautiful. Exposed brick walls, hardwood floors, simple furnishings. Nothing like the opulence of the St. James properties she'd seen. This place felt personal, lived in. Julian sat by the window, gazing out at the city lights. He turned when he heard her enter, his face haggard with exhaustion. "You came," he said, simply. "Of course I came," Sela replied, crossing the room to him. "Julian, what happened? The Times called me, said you resigned." He nodded, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "The board meeting was a disaster. They voted against my Harlem proposal, 8-3, and then my father gave me an ultimatum, fall. In line or get out." "So you got out," Sela said, understanding dawning. "I couldn't be part of what they're doing anymore," Julian said, his voice rough with emotion. "The displacements, the gentrification masked as progress. I tried for years to change things from the inside, but I was kidding myself." Sela sat beside him, taking his hand. "What happens now?" Julian laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Now, I'm officially cut off. No access to company resources, no family trust fund, no St. James privileges. My father made that very clear. Can he do that? My grandmother left me some money that he can't touch, and I've saved some of my own, but compared to what I had yesterday, I'm practically a pauper." There was a glint in his eye that surprised Sela. Not defeat, but something like relief. "You don't seem devastated," she observed. "I'm not," Julian admitted. "For the first time in my life, I feel free, like I can finally build something that's mine, something I believe in." "What will you do?" Julian smiled, a real smile that transformed his tired face. "I already have investors lined up, people who believe in my vision for community-focused development. I'm starting my own company." "Julian, that's amazing." "It's terrifying," he corrected her, "but exciting too. The only thing is," he hesitated, his expression growing serious, "the Connecticut house, it belongs to the family trust. I don't know how long we'll be able to stay there." Sela's heart sank, thinking of Pearl's recovery. "How long do we have?" "A few weeks, probably. My father won't move against me immediately. Too much negative publicity, but eventually, yes. We'll figure something out," Sela said firmly. "Pearl's already improving. Maybe by then she'll be strong enough to return to the apartment." Julian studied her face. "You're not angry." "Why would I be angry?" "Because I've disrupted your life. Because I've put you and Pearl in a precarious position. Because I'm not the wealthy, powerful man you met at that gala." Sela took his face in her hands. "Julian St. James, I said no to that man, remember? It's who you are beneath all that wealth and power that I'm falling in love with." His eyes widened at her words. "You're falling in love with me?" "Against my better judgment," Sela confirmed with a small smile. "But yes." Julian pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not," she agreed, making him laugh. "But you're stuck with me anyway." They stayed that way for a long time, holding each other as the city lights twinkled beyond the window. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. What Sela didn't know was that Alexander St. James was already plotting his revenge. The man who had lost everything wouldn't lose the woman he loved without a fight. As they fell asleep in each other's arms that night, neither of them could have imagined the storm that was about to break over their newfound happiness. A storm that would test everything they thought they knew about love, loyalty, and what truly matters when everything else is stripped away. The morning headlines were brutal. "St. James heir abandons family empire," screamed the business section of the New York Times. "Billionaire playboy gives up fortune for museum girl," proclaimed the gossip columns. Julian's face was plastered across every newspaper in the city, alongside grainy photos of him and Sela at the charity gala. In Julian's small West Village apartment, they sat side by side at the breakfast table, reading the coverage in stunned silence. "They make it sound like I'm some kind of gold digger who forced you to choose between me and your family," Sela said, pushing away the newspaper in disgust. Julian squeezed her hand. "Anyone who knows you would never believe that, and anyone who believes the tabloids isn't worth worrying about." "Your father gave an interview," Sela noted, pointing to a quote. "He says you're having a quarter-life crisis, and he expects you'll come to your senses soon." Julian laughed bitterly. That's his way of saving face. He can't admit that his own son walked away because of his unethical business practices. Sela studied his face. Despite the media storm, Julian looked more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. There was a lightness to him, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "Are you sure you're okay with all this?" she asked. "Giving up everything you've known?" Julian took her hands in his. "I haven't given up everything, just the parts that were suffocating me. And I've gained something far more valuable." His eyes held hers, filled with a tenderness that made her heart skip. "I've gained the freedom to build a life that matters, a life that might someday be worthy of you." Sela leaned forward and kissed him, no longer afraid of the feelings growing between them. "You're already worthy," she whispered against his lips. Julian's phone rang, breaking the moment. He glanced at the screen and frowned. "It's Alexander. I should take this." Sela nodded, gathering the breakfast dishes while Julian answered the call. His voice was guarded as he greeted his brother. "Alex, yes, I saw the papers. No, I'm not reconsidering." "That's not your concern." Julian's expression darkened as he listened. "Is that a threat?" "I see." "No, I don't think we have anything else to discuss." He ended the call, his jaw tight with anger. "What was that about?" Sela asked. "Alexander wanted to remind me of all I'm giving up, and to warn me that if I try to poach any St. James clients for my new venture, they'll sue me into oblivion." "Can they do that?" Julian sighed. "They can try, but I've already consulted with lawyers. As long as I don't use proprietary information or violate my non-compete clause, I should be in the clear." "What about the Connecticut house? Did he say anything about that?" A shadow crossed Julian's face. "Not directly, but he made it clear that the family's patience is limited." Sela bit her lip, thinking of Pearl. "We should start looking for alternatives, just in case." Julian nodded agreement. "I have a meeting with potential investors this afternoon. If it goes well, finding a suitable place for Pearl's recovery will be my first priority." "Our priority," Sela corrected him. "We're in this together now." The smile that broke across Julian's face was worth all the uncertainty ahead of them. "Together," he agreed. Later that day, while Julian was at his meeting, Sela returned to the Connecticut house to check on Pearl. She found her godmother in the garden, practicing her walking with Gloria, the nurse. "Look at you," Sela exclaimed, genuinely impressed by Pearl's progress. "You're moving so much better already." Pearl beamed with pride. "The doctor says I'm ahead of schedule. Must be all this fresh air and fancy living." She glanced around the beautiful grounds with appreciation. "Where's your young man today?" "In the city, meeting with investors." Sela helped Pearl to a garden chair, then dismissed Gloria for a coffee break. "Pearl, there's something I need to tell you." She explained Julian's resignation, the family fallout, and the possibility that they might need to leave the Connecticut house sooner than planned. Pearl listened without interruption, her shrewd eyes taking in Sela's worried expression. "So, he gave up his fortune, his family, and his security for his principles?" "Yes," Sela confirmed, "and I'm afraid it might complicate your recovery." To Sela's surprise, Pearl laughed. "Oh, honey, don't you see? This is the best news I could have heard." What do you mean? I've been worried sick that you were falling for another charming man who valued money and status above all else. Like your father did. Pearl reached for Sayla's hand. Your mother loved your father deeply, but his values destroyed their marriage. He chose wealth over family every time. Sayla had rarely heard Pearl speak of her father this way. After the divorce, when Sayla was just 12, her mother had never criticized him, even as he built a new life with a new family, largely absent from Sayla's life. Julian isn't like that, Sayla said softly. No, he's not, Pearl agreed. He's proven that. And as for my recovery, I'm tougher than I look. We'll manage wherever we end up. Sayla hugged her godmother carefully, mindful of her healing hip. I love you, Pearl. I love you too, honey. Now, when is that handsome man of yours coming back? I have a few things to say to him. Julian returned that evening, his face alight with excitement. He found Sayla and Pearl in the library, playing a heated game of gin rummy. How did the meeting go? Sayla asked, setting down her cards. Better than I could have hoped, Julian replied, loosening his tie. I've secured initial funding for St. James Community Development. Different name, different mission, but still. I'm using the expertise I've built over the years. Congratulations, Sayla exclaimed, rising to embrace him. Pearl cleared her throat. So, young man, I hear you've thrown away a fortune and angered your powerful family. All for your principles. Julian turned to her, his expression serious. Yes, ma'am, I have. Pearl studied him for a long moment, then nodded approvingly. Good. About time someone in your family grew a backbone. Julian laughed, relief evident in his face. Thank you, Pearl. Your opinion means a great deal to me. Well then, you should also know that Sayla told me we might need to leave this lovely house. Pearl's voice was matter-of-fact. And I want you to know that I won't have you worrying about an old woman when you're trying to build something new. Pearl, Sayla began, but her godmother held up a hand. I've been thinking, Pearl continued. My sister in Philadelphia has been asking me to visit for years. She has a ground-floor guest room and lives near an excellent rehabilitation center. Perhaps it's time I took her up on her offer. Sayla stared at her godmother. You never mentioned this before. Because I didn't want to leave you alone, Pearl said simply. But you're not alone anymore, are you? The question hung in the air, filled with meaning. Sayla looked at Julian standing tall and determined, despite all he had sacrificed, and felt a certainty she had never experienced before. No, she answered softly. I'm not alone. That night, after Pearl had gone to bed, Sayla and Julian walked the moonlit grounds discussing the future, both immediate plans and longer-term dreams. My new company will need office space, Julian said. Something modest to start. And I'll need to find an apartment in the city. What about this place? Sayla asked, gesturing to the small apartment above the garage. It's separate from the main house, has its own entrance, could work as a temporary office. Julian considered it. Not a bad idea. My father rarely comes here. It might buy us some time before we have to leave completely. And when we do have to leave, Sayla asked, voicing the question that had been on her mind. What then? Julian stopped walking and turned to face her. Sayla, there's something I want to ask you. And I know it's soon, maybe too soon, but these past weeks have made one thing very clear to me. He took both her hands in his. When I lost my company, my status, my family's approval, none of it hurt the way I thought it would. But the idea of losing you, that's unbearable. Sayla's heart raced as she realized where this was leading. Julian, I'm not asking you to marry me. Not yet, he clarified with a small smile. But I am asking if you'll consider building a life with me, finding a place together, making a home wherever that might be. The old Sayla would have hesitated, would have erected walls of caution and doubt. But standing there in the moonlight with Julian, she felt only certainty. Yes, she said simply, whatever comes next, we'll face it together. The relief and joy that flooded Julian's face was worth every moment of uncertainty that had led them. Here, he pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that spoke of promises and possibilities. Neither of them noticed the car parked at the end of the driveway or the man watching them through the darkness. Alexander St. James observed, his brother's happiness with cold calculation, already planning how best to destroy it. The next morning brought a surprise visitor. Selah was in the kitchen with Mrs. Winters, discussing meal plans for the week, when the housekeeper glanced out the window and gasped, "Oh my! Mr. Richard is here." Selah followed her gaze to see a sleek black car pulling up the driveway. Julian's father. "I'll get Mr. Julian," Mrs. Winters said, hurrying from the room. Selah squared her shoulders, preparing to face the man who had rejected everything Julian stood for. But when the door opened, the figure who entered was not what she had expected. Richard. St. James was tall, with Julian's same sharp jawline and dark hair now streaked with silver. But where she had expected arrogance, she saw exhaustion. Where she had anticipated anger, she found something that looked almost like regret. "You must be Selah," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "I apologize for arriving unannounced." Before she could respond, Julian appeared in the doorway, his posture tense. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Richard turned to his son. "I wanted to speak with you in person, away from the office, away from the board, away from your brothers. Influence." Julian's expression remained guarded. "I have nothing more to say that I didn't say at the board meeting." "Perhaps not," Richard acknowledged, "but I have things to say that couldn't be said there." Reluctantly, Julian gestured toward the study. "We can talk in private." Selah started to withdraw, but Richard stopped her. "Please, Ms. Green, I'd like you to join us. This concerns you as well." The study was a handsome room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a large desk that had belonged to Julian's grandfather. Richard settled into one of the leather armchairs, declining Julian's offer of coffee. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since you walked out," Richard began, his eyes on his son. "And while I don't agree with how you handled things, I'm beginning to understand why." Julian remained silent, waiting. "Your grandmother, my mother-in-law, she would have been proud of you," Richard continued, surprising them both. "She always said you had your mother's heart and my head, a dangerous combination." "What are you saying, Dad?" Julian asked, his voice carefully neutral. Richard sighed heavily. "I'm saying that perhaps there's room for compromise. The Harlem Project, your concerns weren't entirely without merit." Julian's eyebrows rose in surprise. "That's quite a reversal from get in line or get out." "I spoke in anger," Richard admitted. "Alexander had been in my ear for days, pushing me to take a hard line with you. But after you left, I looked more closely at your proposal, at the community impact studies, at the long-term projections." He leaned forward, hands clasped between his knees. "Your approach would take longer to show profits, yes, but it would also create sustainable development, avoid costly legal battles with community groups, and ultimately enhance rather than damage the St. James reputation." Julian exchanged a glance with Selah, clearly skeptical of this sudden change of heart. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Come back," Richard said simply. "Not to your old position, but as head of a new division, St. James Community Development, full creative control over the Harlem Project and similar initiatives moving forward." The offer hung in the air, tempting and suspicious all at once. "And if I refuse?" Julian asked. Richard's expression tightened. "Then we proceed as planned. Your access to family resources, including this house, will be formally terminated. Your shares in the company will be purchased at market value. And your new venture will find itself competing against the full weight of the St. James Empire." Selah couldn't remain silent any longer. "That sounds like a threat." Richard turned to her, his eyes assessing. "Not a threat, Ms. Green. Simply business reality. My son has valuable skills and knowledge. I'd prefer those assets remain within the family company." "My skills and knowledge aren't what concern you," Julian said, his voice hard. "You're worried. About public perception, about what it looks like when your son walks away on principle." A flicker of admiration crossed Richard's face. "You always were perceptive. Yes, your departure has created complications, both internally and with our investors. Your return would stabilize the situation." "At what cost?" Julian asked. "My independence? My vision?" "Not necessarily," Richard countered. "The division I'm proposing would operate with significant autonomy. Your vision could be realized just within the larger St. James framework." Julian shook his head. "And with Alexander working to undermine me at every turn, No, Dad. I appreciate the offer, but I've made my decision. Richard's expression hardened. Alexander said you'd refuse, that the girl and her principles had turned you against your own family. This has nothing to do with Selah, Julian said firmly. This is about what kind of man I want to be, what kind of legacy I want to build. And what about your obligations? To those who depend on you, Richard demanded, gesturing to the house around them. Your godmother's recovery, for instance. How will you provide for her needs now? Selah stepped forward. Pearl doesn't need your charity, Mr. St. James, and neither do I. Julian made his choice for the right reasons, and we stand by him. Richard studied her with new interest. You're not what I expected, Miss Green. When Alexander showed me the background check, I assumed you were after my son's fortune. Background check? Selah echoed, appalled. Julian's face darkened with anger. You had her investigated. Standard procedure for anyone who gets close to the family, Richard said dismissively. But it seems my concerns were misplaced. You genuinely care for my son, not his bank account. I loved Julian before he resigned, Selah said firmly. And I love him now. His bank account has nothing to do with it. The word love hung in the air between them. Julian reached for her hand, squeezing it tightly. Richard observed their connection with a mixture of resignation and something that might have been envy. Well then, it seems my son has found something I never managed to hold onto. Someone who loves the man, not the name or the money. He stood, straightening his expensive suit. The offer remains open, Julian, for now. Think about it. Talk it over. Let me know your decision by the end of the week. At the door, Richard paused. One more thing. Whatever you decide, this house is yours. Your grandmother left it to you, directly in her will. Alexander and I may control the family trust, but this property belongs to you alone. With that bombshell, he departed, leaving Julian and Selah staring at each other in shock. Did you know? Selah asked. About the house? Julian shook his head. My father always said it was part of the family trust. I never questioned it. Why would he lie about something like that? Control, Julian said simply. As long as I believed everything I had came from him, he had power over me. They sat in silence for a moment, processing this new information. What are you going to do? Selah finally asked. About his offer? Julian ran a hand through his hair. I don't know. Part of me wants to tell him to go to hell, but another part, the resources of St. James Development could make a real difference in communities like Harlem. I could do more good from the inside than fighting them from the outside. But at what cost to you? Selah asked softly. Would you be compromising too much of yourself? Before Julian could answer, Pearl appeared in the doorway, supported by her walker. Was that your father I saw leaving? She asked Julian. Yes, he confirmed. He had an interesting proposition. Pearl made her way to a chair, sitting down with a sigh. Well, are you going to tell me about it? Or do I have to pretend I wasn't eavesdropping from the hallway? Julian laughed despite the tension, filling Pearl in on his father's offer and the revelation about the house. Pearl listened thoughtfully, then fixed Julian with a direct gaze. What does your heart tell you to do, young man? Julian considered her question. Seriously? My heart says to keep my independence, to build something new, something truly mine. But my head says that with St. James' resources, I could accomplish more, faster. And what about your soul? Pearl pressed. Which choice lets you sleep at night, knowing you've stayed true to yourself? The question struck a chord. Julian reached for Selah's hand. I need time to think. This isn't just about me anymore. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Julian consulted with lawyers about his father's claims regarding the house, confirming that it was indeed his personal property. Selah continued working remotely for the museum while helping Pearl with her recovery. The press interest in Julian's resignation began to fade as newer scandals took precedence. But Alexander's silent campaign continued. Investors Julian had counted on suddenly became unavailable. Commercial spaces he had been considering for his new company were mysteriously taken off the market before he could sign leases. He's trying to sabotage me, Julian told Selah one evening as they sat on the terrace, making sure I have no choice but to accept my father's offer. Can he really block you from starting your own company? Selah asked. Julian shrugged. He can make it harder, delay things, force me to start smaller than I'd planned, but he can't stop me completely. Then maybe that's your answer, Selah suggested. Start small. Build something that's truly yours, even if it takes longer. Julian smiled at her. When did you become such a wise business advisor? I've always been wise, Selah teased. You were just too busy being a billionaire playboy to notice. Their laughter was interrupted by Mrs. Winters, who appeared with a worried expression. Mr. Julian, there's someone here to see you, a Ms. Olivia Rothschild. Julian's smile vanished. Olivia? Here? Selah recognized the name from tabloid stories about Julian's past, a socialite he had dated briefly before meeting Selah. Should I make myself scarce? She asked, only half joking. Absolutely not, Julian said firmly. Show her out here, Mrs. Winters. Olivia Rothschild was exactly as Selah had imagined, tall, blonde, expensively dressed, and beautiful in a polished, artificial way. She air-kissed Julian on both cheeks, then turned curious eyes to Selah. You must be the museum girl, she said, her voice dripping with false warmth. The papers have been full of your story, so romantic. Selah Green, Selah corrected, extending her hand. And you're Olivia. What brings you to Connecticut? Olivia settled gracefully into a chair. I was in the area for a charity luncheon and thought I'd stop by to see how Julian is doing after his career change. Julian remained standing, his posture tense. How did you know I was here? Oh, Alexander mentioned it, Olivia said casually. We had dinner last night at Le Bernardin. He's quite concerned about you, Julian. The implication was clear. Alexander was using Julian's ex to gather information to apply more pressure. I appreciate the concern, Julian said coolly, but as you can see, I'm doing fine. Olivia's gaze swept over the grounds, the house, and finally, Selah herself. Yes, I can see that. Although I must admit, I was surprised by your choice. No offense, Selah, but you're not exactly Julian's usual type. That's the best compliment you could give me, Selah replied with a sweet smile. Julian suppressed a laugh, his hand finding Selah's shoulder in a gesture of support. Olivia, was there something specific you wanted? Or is this just a social call? Olivia's smile tightened. Actually, I did have a message from Alexander. He wanted me to remind you that your father's offer expires tomorrow, and that certain complications might arise if you decline. Complications, Julian repeated. Something about tax audits and building inspections at your potential office. Locations, Olivia said vaguely. You know how these things can be such a nuisance for new businesses. Julian's jaw tightened. You can tell Alexander that threats won't change my mind. Oh, I'm not involved in all that business stuff, Olivia said with a dismissive wave. I'm just passing along a message from a friend. She stood, smoothing her designer dress. Well, I should be going. Lovely to meet you, Selah. Do take care. D'au Julian. He's not used to living without his comforts. After she left, Julian paced the terrace, furious. Alexander is really pulling out all the stops, using Olivia as a messenger, threatening to use family connections to block my business permits. Can he actually do that? Selah asked. In this city? With the St. James name and connections? Yes, he can make things very difficult. Julian stopped pacing and turned to her. But difficult isn't impossible. His expression was resolute, a decision clearly made. I'm turning down my father's offer. I need to build something of my own, something that reflects my values, not the St. James legacy. Selah felt a surge of pride. It won't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is, Julian replied, pulling her into his arms. But I have you. And this house and my grandmother's inheritance. It's more than enough to build a new beginning. That evening, Pearl announced that she had spoken with her sister in Philadelphia and would be moving there next week to continue her recovery. The doctor says I'm healing well enough to travel, she informed them, and Barbara is beside herself with excitement about having me there. Are you sure about this? Selah asked, concerned. You don't have to leave on our account. Pearl patted her hand. Honey, it's time. You and Julian need space to figure out your future together, and I need to let you live your life without worrying about an old lady. You're not just an old lady, Selah protested. You're family, and family knows when to hold on and when to let go, Pearl said wisely. Besides, Barbara has a swimming pool for water therapy, And a cute widower next door she's been dying to introduce me to. Julian laughed. Pearl Jenkins, are you saying you're leaving us for a man? I'm saying I'm ready for my own next chapter, Pearl corrected him with a twinkle in her eye. Just like you two are ready for yours. The following day, Julian called his father to formally decline the offer to return to St. James Development. The conversation was brief but surprisingly civil. He almost sounded proud, Julian told Saylor afterward. In his own way, said I was more like him than he realized, stubborn to a fault. Is that a compliment? Saylor asked with a smile. From my father. Absolutely. With Pearl's departure planned and Julian's decision made, they began to look forward. Julian converted the apartment above the garage into a temporary office for his fledgling company. Saylor arranged to split her time between the museum in the city and working remotely from Connecticut. The obstacles Alexander had promised began to materialize. Permits were delayed. Potential clients received mysterious warnings about Julian's reliability, but for every door that closed, Julian found a window, smaller projects, community-based initiatives that flew beneath his brother's radar. It's not the grand start I envisioned, he admitted to Saylor one night as they reviewed his business plan. But maybe that's better, building from the ground up, one project at a time. Like us, Saylor observed, one day at a time. The day of Pearl's departure arrived too soon. Julian arranged for a private car to take her to Philadelphia, with Gloria accompanying her for the journey. As they helped load Pearl's belongings, Saylor fought back tears. Now none of that, Pearl scolded gently. This isn't goodbye, it's just a new arrangement. You'll visit, I'll call, and before you know it, I'll be dancing at your wedding. Pearl. Saylor blushed. What, you think I don't see where this is heading? Pearl turned to Julian. You take care of her, young man. She needs someone to remind her that she deserves happiness too. Julian nodded solemnly. I will, Pearl, I promise. As the car pulled away, Saylor leaned against Julian's side, feeling a complex mixture of sadness and hope. The house seems emptier. Already, Julian put his arm around her. We could fill it again. Eventually. She looked up at him, understanding his meaning. Eventually, she agreed. But first we have some building to do. That night they sat in the garden watching the stars emerge. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. Julian faced an uphill battle establishing his company against his family's opposition. Saylor balanced her career with this new life they were creating together. But for the first time, neither of them felt alone in their struggles. I've been thinking, Julian said, taking her hand, about the first time we met, about how you said no. Saylor smiled at the memory. I was so sure you were just another rich playboy used to getting whatever you wanted. I was, Julian admitted, until I met a woman who saw through all that, who challenged me to be better, to be more. He shifted to face her directly. Saylor Green, you saying no was the best thing. That ever happened to me. It made me work to be worthy of a yes. From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. Not a ring box, but something smaller. He opened it to reveal a simple silver key on a delicate chain. This is the key to this house, he explained. My house. The only thing I truly own that isn't tied to the St. James name. I want you to have it, not as a proposal, not yet, but as a promise, that whatever we build together will be real, solid, and true. Tears filled Saylor's eyes as she took the necklace, letting Julian fasten it around her neck. The key rested against her heart, a tangible symbol of their journey. I used to think men like you were storms, powerful, destructive, and temporary, she told him. But you're not a storm, Julian. You're a foundation, something to build upon. He kissed her then, under the starlit sky, both of them knowing that this was just the beginning of their story. There would be challenges ahead. Alexander's continued opposition, the struggle to establish Julian's new company, the balance of Saylor's career and their relationship, but they would face it all together one day at a time, because sometimes the greatest love stories don't begin with yes. Sometimes they begin with a woman strong enough to say no, and a man wise enough to realize that earning her trust would be his greatest achievement. In the months that followed, Julian's company secured its first major project, a mixed-income housing development in Brooklyn. Saylor received a promotion at the museum, heading a new digital archiving initiative. Pearl thrived in Philadelphia, her regular phone calls full of stories about her sister's widower neighbor and the water aerobics class she had joined. And in the quiet moments, in the peaceful sanctuary of the Connecticut house that had become their home, Julian and Sela continued to build something neither had expected to find. A love based not on convenience or advantage, but on mutual respect, shared values, and the courage to choose what matters most. One evening as they walked, hand in hand through his grandmother's rose garden, now blooming under Sela's careful attention, Julian stopped beneath an arbor covered in climbing roses. "I never thought I'd be grateful for rejection," he said, smiling down at Sela. "But that day when you walked away from me at the gala, it changed everything." "For both of us," Sela agreed, reaching up to touch his face. "Sometimes saying no to the wrong thing is the only way to make space for the right one." Julian drew her closer, his eyes filled with love and certainty. "And sometimes the right thing takes time, patience, and the courage to let go of everything you thought you wanted." As the sun set over their shared future, painting the sky in shades of promise, Sela and Julian stood together in the garden they'd cultivated, both the literal one around them and the love they'd grown between them. A love that had begun with a simple, powerful word: no. A word that had created space for something far more meaningful than either could have imagined. A word that had become the foundation for the most important yes of their lives. The end.